What you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a door. One that's been opened before, and may never truly close. If you feel something watching, you're not alone. Like the video if you've ever felt it too. Subscribe, and we'll keep the light on. And if it spoke to you, tell us what it said in the comments. Washington, D.C., late 1940s. The cold never truly left the air that winter, and it wasn't just the wind that made people shiver in their coats. Something else was going on. Something unspoken. On the outside, the world went about its usual post-war pace. Baseball, jazz, and the promise of American normalcy. But behind the brick walls of a small home in Cottage City, Maryland, just outside the capital, something ancient stirred. Something that would eventually inspire one of the most disturbing films ever made. It began, innocently enough, with a boy. Not a little girl like in the movie, but a quiet, introspective 13-year-old named Ronald Edwin Hunkler. A lonely kid by most accounts. Bright, but reserved. Not many friends. He had a deep bond with his Aunt Harriet, who introduced him to the occult, Ouija boards, spirit writing, parlor seances, things they treated as little more than games. Until the games turned on them. She passed suddenly in early January 1949. A stroke, they said. Ronald was devastated. The night of her funeral, he tried contacting her with the Ouija board they played with together. He asked simple questions. "Are you there? Is it really you? Can you hear me?" Something answered. At first, the responses were vague. He'd feel the planchette twitch on its own. Lights in the house flickered. Clock stopped. But nothing that couldn't be explained away. Until the scratches started. The Hunklers heard them first, scraping beneath the boys' floorboards, thumping in the walls, a dragging sound that moved from one room to the next like something slithering just out of view. Ronald's bed began to shake violently at night. He screamed that he saw shadows crawling along his ceiling and voices whispering from within his mattress. His mother found deep scratches on his arms that bled slowly, but never got infected. They spelled out words sometimes. Names. Latin phrases. None of which Ronald had ever been taught. Desperate, his family turned to the Lutheran Church for help, but their ministers were powerless. They referred him to mental health professionals, psychiatrists, neurologists. But every scan came back normal. He was physically fine, emotionally shaken, but not insane. The phenomenon only intensified. One night, a vase hurled itself across the room while Ronald sat perfectly still. The family Bible was torn in half, each page ripped cleanly from its spine and scattered like dry leaves across the living room. Ronald's eyes turned dark, almost all pupil, as he spoke in a guttural voice, one too deep, too ancient to come from a child. The family sought help from a Catholic priest at St. James Church in Mt. Rainier, a man named Father Albert Hughes. He was reluctant. He didn't know what to make of it. He'd never performed an exorcism before. But after watching a chair lift off the ground and slam into a wall while Ronald simply stared at it, he filed an official request with the Archdiocese. Permission was granted, but Hughes wouldn't last. He began the ritual in a small room at Georgetown University Hospital. Ronald was strapped to the bed. Crosses were hung. Holy water readied. As soon as the prayers began, Ronald's voice changed again. He laughed, mocking Hughes in Latin. He spoke of things the priest had done in secret. Sins confessed, shame hidden. The restraints snapped. A bed spring was wrenched free from the frame, and Ronald stabbed the priest across the arm with it. The ritual was abandoned. Father Hughes was never the same. Some say he left the priesthood soon after. Others claim he went mad. That should have been the end of it. But the Hunklers moved in with relatives in St. Louis, hoping distance would silence whatever haunted their son. It didn't. The knocking followed. So did the levitating objects. Ronald began speaking in tongues, claiming to be someone or something else entirely. The voices inside him multiplied. He would cry out in pain as welts appeared across his body, some of them shaped like crosses. One night, the word "hello" appeared, burned into his stomach like a brand. Another night, "evil." In St. Louis, the church tried again, this time with more caution. Jesuit priests, experienced and deliberate, took over the case. Chief among them was Father William Bowdern, a professor at St. Louis University, assisted by Father Walter Halloran and a handful of others. What they encountered would torment them for the rest of their lives. Over the next several weeks, they performed the rite of exorcism over 30 times. Ronald would spit at them, vomit, speak in languages no one had taught him. The air would drop to near freezing in his room, regardless of the season. At one point, the priests claimed they saw the boy's body lift off the bed entirely, then twist in midair, writhing in impossible ways. Furniture moved on its own. A crucifix shattered. The boy's eyes rolled back into his skull. And yet through it all, he begged, somewhere deep inside, pleading for help in a whisper only heard when the priests paused. One night, they attempted the exorcism at the Election Brothers Hospital. The procedure escalated violently. Ronald screamed, his voice distorted, saying the words, "I am Legion." The lights blew out. Father Halloran was thrown across the room. But they didn't stop. Then, after more than a month, it happened. During the final session, Ronald reportedly shouted, "Satan, I am Michael, and I command you to leave this body now." A long silence followed. Then Ronald convulsed, screamed louder than ever before, and collapsed into unconsciousness. When he woke, he said the voices were gone. The shadows were gone. He felt peace, and it never came back. The priests kept detailed journals, but the church buried them deep. Whispers spread, of course, and eventually caught the attention of author William Peter Blatty, who'd been a student at Georgetown during the original events. He fictionalized the case, altering the child into a girl, Reagan McNeil, and the location to a modest house in D.C. The result was The Exorcist, first a novel in 1971, then the legendary 1973 film directed by William Friedkin. But Hollywood never captured the full terror of what truly happened. People connected to the production reported strange accidents and deaths. The set caught fire, burning everything but the girl's room. Actor Jack McGoran died shortly after filming wrapped. Ellen Burstyn suffered a back injury during a take. And Jason Miller, who played Father Karras, received a disturbing warning from a real priest before shooting began. "Be careful. There are things that don't want this story told." Despite its fame and legacy, few truly understand how real The Exorcist was, or how much darker the real case might have been. And even fewer know what happened to Ronald. He changed his name, lived in obscurity, worked for NASA, believe it or not, helping design heat shields for the Apollo missions. He never spoke of what happened, never admitted anything. But neighbors say he avoided churches, couldn't look at crucifixes. Some claimed they heard him muttering in strange languages late at night. In 2003, a sealed diary was discovered beneath the floorboards of the hospital wing where the exorcism was once performed. It contained frantic scribbles, drawings of grotesque faces, and chilling words. It was never really over. And the final page? Blank, as if waiting to be continued. The truth is, Ronald Hunkler may have walked free of the demons that tormented him, but not everyone who came near him did. The priests who conducted the ritual tried to return to normal life, to their studies and sermons, but something had shifted. Some said it was their faith that had been shaken. Others believed it was their sanity. Father William Bowdern never fully recovered from what he had seen. He aged rapidly in the years after the exorcism. Those close to him said he developed a quiet tremor in his hands and would sometimes flinch at shadows. He never spoke publicly about the ritual again, though he reportedly kept a journal that was never released, sealed and stored deep within the archives of the Jesuit community in St. Louis. Those who claim to have read pieces of it speak of pages filled with strange symbols, entries interrupted mid-sentence, and ink smeared like the pages had been grabbed in terror. Father Walter Halloran, the youngest of the priests, was the only one who occasionally talked about the case, carefully and never in full detail. In interviews decades later, he admitted things moved, things no child could fake. He had seen the boy's eyes turn completely white, his tongue fork like a serpent's. He described the boy speaking in a voice that came from below the ground. Once, he said, the room felt like it was sinking beneath the building. Walls bending inward, ceiling pressing down, as though gravity itself was being rewritten. But the most disturbing detail Halloran ever mentioned was one he almost never repeated. He said that on the final night of the exorcism, just before the ritual succeeded, Ronald had begun speaking in two voices at once. One was the shrieking, violent presence they'd come to know. But the second? It whispered, calm, almost sympathetic, as if trying to reason with the priests. "He's not ready," it said. "He's mine already." It promised to return, not to the boy, but to someone else. It didn't make sense at the time, but then neither did what happened to those who got too close to the case. A nurse at the hospital where the exorcism took place vanished in 1951. Her name was Margaret Dole. She had worked night shift during several of the early sessions and told co-workers she'd seen Ronald levitate off the bed and convulse violently. She told a friend she had seen something step out of him during one of the rituals, something tall, thin, and misshapen, like a shadow cast by a crooked lamp. She said she dreamed of it standing over her bed. Then one night, she never came home from her shift. No evidence. No witnesses. Her apartment was untouched, her car still parked outside the hospital. The only clue was a single word scratched into the inside of her locker door. Still. A decade later, a young theology student named Daniel Keene broke into the sealed Jesuit archives. He had grown obsessed with the exorcism, insisting it had been covered up by the church. He stole a handful of pages from Bowdern's lost journal and was expelled immediately. Friends said he became paranoid afterward, convinced he was being followed. He spoke of seeing the boy again, though Ronald was still living quietly under an alias at the time. In 1963, Keene was found dead in his off-campus apartment. He had barricaded the door from the inside. Every window was nailed shut. The police report noted strange symbols burned into the floorboards around him. His hands were broken, twisted backward. His eyes had been gouged out. And yet, there was no sign of forced entry. The autopsy couldn't determine the cause of death. Only the smell of burned sulfur lingered in the air. The journal pages he stole? Never found. Stories like these were passed down like urban legends. Rumors whispered in seminary halls and late-night theology debates. Most dismissed them. But for those who were there, they never truly left it behind. And then came the film. In 1972, during the first week of shooting The Exorcist, the set of the McNeil home caught fire. The blaze destroyed most of the interior, halting production for over a month. The only room left untouched? The one used for the girl's bedroom. The site of the exorcism scenes. Director William Friedkin was shaken. So were the cast. Ellen Burstyn was injured when a rigged harness slammed her against a wall during one of Reagan's possessed moments. The scream used in the film was real. She damaged her spine and suffered chronic pain for years after. Jack McGoran, who played the doomed Burke Dennings, died unexpectedly just days after completing his scenes. Linda Blair's grandfather passed during filming. A night watchman died on set. The assistant cameraman's baby died during production. And Mercedes McCambridge, who provided the voice for the demon, suffered her own descent afterward. Her son murdered his own children before turning the gun on himself. People began to ask, was the film cursed? But the answer might be darker than that, because something else happened, something not widely reported. During post-production, audio engineers working on the demon's voice began reporting strange feedback in their headphones. Not just static, whispers, Latin prayers played backward, names spoken in an unknown tongue. One engineer refused to work alone in the studio. He claimed the equipment was fine, but something was speaking into the mic when no one was there. The tapes have since disappeared. Even William Peter Blatty, the author of the original novel, said in interviews that he was warned not to write it. He claimed a monk once approached him in a cathedral and said, "Some truths are not yours to tell." Blatty laughed it off at the time. But later, after the film's release, he stopped speaking about the real exorcism entirely. He'd say it was fiction, that he invented most of it. But his early drafts told a different story, drafts that never made it to print. And yet, the world moved on. The boy, Ronald, grew into a man. Quiet, smart. He patented several inventions for NASA. He retired peacefully. But even in old age, neighbors say he avoided sleep. They'd see him walking his dog at 3 a.m., staring up at the sky like something might fall out of it. One man, a neighbor who lived beside him in Maryland for years, once asked Ronald about the rumors. The man said Ronald stared at him for a long time, silent. Then he said only this: "I remember the voices, but not what they said." And then he walked away. After his death in 2020, a box was found in his attic. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, photos of old priests, a crucifix wrapped in red thread, and a single cassette tape labeled, "Do not play." The audio on it? Still being examined. Because as one forensic audio technician reportedly said after hearing it, "It wasn't just a voice. It was something listening." After the final ritual was completed in 1949, and the boy known as Robbie, or Ronald Hunkler, seen free from possession, the Catholic Church did what it always does when it encounters the inexplicable. It buried it. The priests returned to their diocese. The medical records vanished. The files were sealed. And the silence began, not just from those involved, but from anyone who had seen the boy during those unholy weeks. But silence has a weight. And in the years that followed, it began crushing everyone who tried to carry it. Father Bowdern, once a vibrant academic and confident Jesuit, was said to have become withdrawn, haunted. Students remembered him staring into space during lectures, trembling slightly as if he were cold in a warm room. He refused to ever perform another exorcism. Some nights, he was seen pacing alone in the chapel long after midnight, whispering Latin prayers under his breath. One of his colleagues once asked him about the ritual. All Bowdern said was, "We were not prepared. We never could have been." He died in 1983, but rumors circulated for years about his final days, how he screamed in his sleep, how he refused last rites, and how his deathbed confession was never transcribed. Then there was Father Halloran. Of all the priests, he seemed to suffer the least, at least publicly. But in private interviews, when pressed for details, his expression would harden. He refused to sensationalize the events, saying only that they were real and dangerous. In one of his final interviews before his death in 2005, he was asked if he still believed the boy had been possessed. His reply was chilling. "It wasn't just one thing inside him." That was the theme running through every account, the multiplicity of the force that had taken hold. Not just a demon, but something worse. Something coordinated, something aware, and others who came near that force. They didn't survive it. Sister Catherine Ardot, a nun who had been assigned to clean the boys' hospital room after the sessions ended, suffered a nervous breakdown just 3 months later. Her superiors described her as unstable, but not dangerous, until the night she locked herself in the convent's chapel and gouged her palms open with broken stained glass, smearing a symbol across the altar that no one could identify. She vanished from records after that. No obituary, no transfer, just erased. Even within the church, whispers began to surface of a quiet purge. Pages from exorcism manuals removed, witness reports redacted, entire case files sealed with the Vatican's highest authority. A single directive was allegedly sent out to all bishops in the region. The boy survived. That is all you are allowed to say. But survivors don't always stay silent. Gerald Muldoon, a maintenance worker at the hospital during the 1949 ritual, kept his own notes. Years later, his granddaughter discovered a locked trunk in his attic after his death. Inside were sketches of symbols, crude drawings of a boy with blackened eyes, and a single journal filled with panicked writing. One passage read, "I saw it crawl across the ceiling like smoke, but it had shape, legs, arms, a face like wax melting. It looked at me." Muldoon died in 1977. Cause of death was a stroke. But his body was found surrounded by salt, crucifixes nailed into every wall, and one message carved into the wood of his floor. It said it would come back. Meanwhile, Ronald Hunkler was left to piece his life together in obscurity. He changed his name, avoided religion, built a career in aerospace, reportedly working on the Apollo mission's heat shield design. But those who worked with him described him as private, quiet, and deeply anxious. One colleague said Ronald once had a violent panic attack during a lightning storm. He collapsed in the lab, clutching a medallion around his neck. When asked what was wrong, he simply said, "I thought I heard it again." And then there were the journalists, amateurs, skeptics, seekers of the truth. One such man was Stephen Hill, an investigative writer based in New York. In 1978, he began digging into the original exorcism, trying to trace the boy's real identity. He filed FOIA requests, contacted St. Louis University, and even tried to interview surviving clergy. The deeper he went, the stranger things got. His phone line began receiving static-filled calls in the middle of the night. No voice, just breathing. When he developed photos from the old hospital grounds, several came back warped, light blurs shaped like clawed hands, shadows that stretched toward the camera as if trying to escape. Then, in April 1980, Hill disappeared. His car was found abandoned off a service road near Missouri. Inside, his notes were scattered, most of them burned, others soaked in what appeared to be salt water. The last page in his journal read, "The boy was only the beginning." Years passed. The legend of the exorcism grew into myth, then into Hollywood. But the real echoes of it, those remained. And as The Exorcist gained its own curse-ridden legacy, new witnesses began surfacing, often only once, before retreating into silence. A woman who worked on the film's soundstage claimed she saw a man standing in Reagan's bedroom while it was being filmed, tall, pale, dressed like a priest. But when she asked who he was, no one else had seen him. Security footage showed the room was locked from the outside the entire night. Another time, a voice coach reviewing Linda Blair's ADR recordings found an extra vocal track layered beneath the demon voice. When isolated, it was a male voice whispering over and over, "I never left." The church refused to comment. The studio buried the incident. The tapes vanished. In 2001, a man walked into a confessional booth in Baltimore claiming to have known the boy. The priest later told another clergyman that the man confessed to burying something beneath the Election Brothers Hospital, something from the ritual that had never been accounted for. The man wouldn't say what it was, only that it had to stay buried. The next day, the man threw himself into the Patapsco River. His name was never released. The hospital itself was demolished shortly after. Before the demolition crew began work, one worker said they found a hidden compartment beneath the sub-basement. Inside were dozens of melted candles, rusted chains, and a child's mattress, rotted, stained, and clawed apart. There were scratch marks in the concrete below it, as if something had been trying to dig down, not up. As of today, the Catholic Church still maintains that the case is an isolated incident. They never officially called it a possession. They never confirmed Ronald's identity. They claimed the exorcism followed protocol and was ultimately successful. But what no one seems to be able to explain is this: why, in the archived Vatican Exorcism Registry, kept secret but leaked in fragments in 1999, is the 1949 case labeled not as resolved, but as unconfirmed, presence lingering. In 1969, while the church tried desperately to keep the real exorcism buried beneath layers of silence and sealed files, William Peter Blatty was sitting in a small Georgetown cafe rereading his old college journals. He had graduated from Georgetown University 20 years earlier and had always been haunted by the whispers, rumors about a possession, about Jesuit priests battling an unseen evil in one of the hospital wings just a few blocks from campus. Blatty had been a devout Catholic, but he was also a skeptic. He didn't believe in demons, at least not at first. But something about the story stayed with him. He tracked down newspaper clippings, obscure church reports, and spoke with anyone who would talk. Most wouldn't, but a few gave him just enough. A location, a name, a phrase spoken in fear. He wrote The Exorcist in a rush, as if the story had been waiting to escape him. The novel was published in 1971 and became an instant sensation. Critics were divided, the public was horrified, and the church, despite its disapproval, couldn't ignore it. Blatty always insisted that he was telling a true story, only lightly fictionalized. He changed the boy to a girl, changed cities, changed names. But the bones of it remained intact. Then came the film adaptation. In 1972, director William Friedkin signed on to helm The Exorcist, and everything began to unravel. Even before shooting began, a feeling of unease crept over the production. Friedkin, known for his intensity, insisted on realism in every aspect. He wanted the audience to feel what the priests felt, to experience the fear firsthand. He brought in real priests to bless the set. He hired medical consultants who had read the original case notes. He even visited the exact hospital where the real exorcism took place, what remained of it, anyway. That was when the first thing went wrong. Shortly after returning from that location, the set for the McNeil home caught fire. Everything burned. Cameras, props, backdrops reduced to ash. Everything except for one room, the child's bedroom, where the exorcism scenes would be shot. That room remained untouched. Not a single scorch mark. The fire marshal called it unexplainable. Filming was delayed for 6 weeks. And that's when the deaths began. Jack McGoran, who played the alcoholic director Burke Dennings, died of a sudden flu just after finishing his scenes. Vasiliki Maliaros, who portrayed Father Karras' mother, died soon after. Both deaths were unrelated to each other, but happened within days. 9 people associated with the film would die before or shortly after the film's release. Then there were the injuries. Ellen Burstyn, who played Reagan's mother, was injured during a take where Reagan throws her across the room. The harness rigging snapped too violently, slamming her against a wall. Her scream of pain in the final cut? It was real. She suffered a permanent spinal injury. Later, she said, "There was something wrong on that set. I could feel it, like we weren't alone." Linda Blair, only 13 years old at the time, was also injured. She suffered a fractured spine when her bed rig malfunctioned during a scene. She also became sick frequently during production, fevers, nausea, rashes, none of which could be diagnosed. Her mother claimed Linda would sleepwalk during filming and speak in her sleep in voices that weren't hers. And then there were the sounds. The sound department, tasked with editing the demon's voice, began reporting unusual frequencies embedded in the recordings, low, rumbling tones they hadn't added. Some editors claimed to hear whispering under the demon's dialogue. One technician, after isolating the audio layers, heard what sounded like a man screaming in Latin. Another swore he heard his own name repeated in the static. That technician quit. The tapes were re-recorded. Mercedes McCambridge, the Oscar-winning actress hired to voice the demon, demanded that her performance be kept anonymous at first. She underwent brutal physical strain to create the voice, chain smoking, vomiting between takes, even swallowing raw eggs and whiskey. But during one recording session, she began convulsing. Her hands clenched. Her voice dropped several octaves. She fell into a trance-like state and reportedly began speaking in a language no one present recognized. The studio paused recording. She woke up minutes later with no memory of it. Months later, her son murdered his wife and children before killing himself. In his suicide note, he blamed a curse. Friedkin, obsessed with authenticity, continued pushing his cast. He would fire guns on set without warning to elicit real reactions. He demanded exorcisms of the set when several crew members refused to return. A night watchman died of a heart attack between shoots. A carpenter lost several fingers in an accident involving an unpowered circular saw. At one point, the entire set was evacuated because a light rig fell inches from Linda Blair's head. But the most disturbing incident was kept quiet for years. A film editor named Paul Darnell was reviewing dailies late one night when he noticed something strange. A single frame, one frame, out of thousands, showed an image that didn't belong. It was not part of the film. It showed a face. Not Reagan's. Not the demon's. It was pale, gaunt, with hollow black sockets for eyes and a twisted mouth stretched wide open. The film was rechecked. That frame wasn't in any of the footage from that day's shoot, nor had it been inserted by mistake. It was burned directly into the film negative. They destroyed the reel. That face, later, would inspire the Captain Howdy makeup briefly used in the final film. But Friedkin never said where he got the idea. After the film's release, theaters hired paramedics to stand by. People fainted, vomited, suffered seizures. In one case, a woman broke her jaw after fainting and sued Warner Brothers. Another audience member claimed he felt something grab the back of his neck during the exorcism scene. In the UK, it was banned in several counties. Priests were asked to counsel viewers suffering from panic attacks. Churches called the film evil. Some said it invited demons into the audience's homes. But Blatty stood by his work, even as he grew more reclusive. In one interview, years later, he admitted, "There were parts one didn't write. Not consciously. Sometimes I'd wake up, and they'd be on the page." He never explained what he meant. When Blatty died in 2017, his family discovered a draft of an unpublished sequel hidden among his papers. The pages were scattered, incomplete, but the final scene described a priest walking into a hospital basement to find a sealed room, one containing a child's bed, surrounded by chains and melted candles. Etched into the concrete wall was the phrase, "It is still waiting." In the final years of his life, Ronald Hunkler rarely spoke to anyone outside of his small circle of family and trusted co-workers. He retired quietly in Maryland, content to let the world forget the ordeal he had survived. Or perhaps he knew the world hadn't really forgotten. It had just repackaged his trauma into entertainment. He never gave an interview, never acknowledged he was the boy from the infamous 1949 exorcism. Even as The Exorcist became legend, inspiring books, sequels, and endless investigations, Ronald Hunkler lived as a phantom, a man who had survived something no one else truly understood. But what many don't know is that in the weeks before his death in 2020, something began to change. He stopped sleeping. His neighbors noticed lights on in his home at all hours. He was seen pacing through the backyard, barefoot, staring at the tree line. One neighbor said they heard him screaming in the middle of the night, just once, but with a raw, animal fear that lingered long after the sound stopped. Then he died. Natural causes, they said. Peaceful. But the strange part came after. When his family began cleaning out his house, they found something hidden in the attic crawlspace. A small, wooden box nailed shut from the inside. It took a crowbar to get it open. Inside were yellowed photographs from the 1940s, a cracked crucifix with burn marks at its base, and a cassette tape labeled in all caps, "Do not play." There was also a leather-bound notebook with no name, no dates, just page after page of disturbed writing, some in Latin, some in languages no one could recognize, most of it unreadable. But one sentence repeated itself across several pages, written in larger and darker ink. "IT never left me." The family, frightened, handed the box over to a local historian, an amateur researcher named Joel Drummond, who had long been obsessed with the original exorcism case. Drummond was skeptical. He thought it was all myth, all media hype, until he played the tape. He later wrote a blog post describing the experience, though the entry was quickly taken down. Internet archives preserved part of it. In it, he claimed the cassette began with static, then came breathing. Deep, ragged, labored. Like someone, or something, struggling to push through. After a few seconds, a voice whispered, "You said it was over." Then silence. Then screams. Not from a boy. From many voices, all layered over each other. Male, female, young, ancient, all crying out in torment and ecstasy. Then a final whisper, "I am still inside." The tape ended. Drummond stopped responding to emails a week later. His home was found abandoned. No signs of struggle, but his belongings were scattered as if he'd left in a hurry. His computer was smashed. The box, the tape, and the notebook were gone. Only his last Google search remained open. How do you know if something followed you home? It wasn't the first time this had happened. A priest who visited the Georgetown campus in the 1990s reported hearing voices near the old hospital wing, whispers saying his name, even though no one was there. A maintenance worker claimed he found small, childlike handprints on the inside of a locked electrical closet. Security footage showed no one entering for days. In 2012, a documentary filmmaker tried to track down any surviving participants in the original exorcism. He interviewed relatives of Father Bowdern and Father Halloran, dug into church archives, and even found a surviving nurse who had witnessed the boy's fits during the early hospital visits. She refused to be filmed. But she said one thing, clutching her rosary with shaking hands. They were wrong. It didn't leave. It just learned how to hide. And what about the site of the final exorcism? The wing of the old Election Brothers Hospital was demolished in the 1970s, but rumors persist that something was left behind. Construction workers involved in the demolition spoke of tools disappearing, unexplained injuries, and equipment failures when they reached the basement. One foreman refused to return after a week of working there, saying he saw someone crawling on the ceiling upside down like a spider, but there was no one there. The lot was eventually paved over. Now it's a parking garage. Visitors have reported hearing scratching underneath their cars when parked near the far wall. A few even claim they've heard children giggling in the empty stairwell that leads nowhere. In 2021, a paranormal team illegally entered the garage overnight. Their audio recordings picked up dozens of EVP, electronic voice phenomena, signals. Most were indistinct, but one voice was clear, a child's voice. "They made me let it in." The investigators never published their footage. And now, a strange pattern has begun to emerge. People who deeply study the Exorcist case, who immerse themselves in the details, have started reporting similar experiences: sleep paralysis, nightmares, electrical disturbances. One Reddit user, who posted a detailed timeline of the Ronald Hunkler case, updated 2 weeks later to say his home office had filled with the smell of sulfur and that his crucifix had twisted itself upside down on the wall. He hasn't posted since. It's as if the story itself is a conduit, a bridge, and every time it's retold, something stirs. And that brings us back to the church. For years, the Vatican refused to acknowledge the 1949 case. But in a classified memo uncovered by a whistleblower in 2018, an internal warning was issued to priests involved in spiritual warfare training. "The American case is not closed. Do not speak its name aloud. Do not investigate. The source was not contained, only silenced." It ends with one final line, written by an unknown bishop. "It crossed over once. It can do so again." What really happened in The Exorcist's dark past? Maybe the better question is, what is still happening? Because this wasn't just a haunting, or a possession. It wasn't about Ronald, or the church, or even the movie. It was about a door that was opened, and one that was never truly closed. If this was just a movie, it would have ended with the demon defeated, evil vanquished, peace restored. But this was never just a movie. Long before The Exorcist terrified the world, something ancient slipped into our reality through a moment of vulnerability. Through a child suffering, through the church's desperation, through the attention of thousands of eyes watching and waiting and wondering, what if it's real? There is one final story most have never heard. It was buried in a forgotten collection of case files from the Archdiocese of Washington, sealed away in a private archive that, for a brief moment, was digitized during a transition in the early 2000s. Within the records of pastoral visits, baptisms, and rites of reconciliation, there was a document dated January 12, 1952. It's short, handwritten, no signature. Just a line that reads, "The boy's eyes went black again last night. It is not finished." This was nearly 3 years after the exorcism was declared a success. That same month, according to archived hospital records, Ronald Hunkler was admitted to a psychiatric ward for a brief dissociative episode. It was never mentioned publicly, never brought up again. The doctors at the time attributed it to residual trauma. But one nurse noted in the margins of his file, "He speaks in voices when no one's watching." By the 1960s, the Hunkler family had relocated to a small town in Maryland, their names scrubbed from nearly all public records. Ronald tried to live a quiet life. He worked at NASA under strict security clearance, contributing to technical patents that would later help in the Apollo space missions. And yet, even surrounded by science, the darkness never fully lifted. Co-workers described him as brilliant but reclusive. One lab technician recalled walking past his office one night in 1974 and hearing what sounded like someone whispering in Latin. She assumed he was reading out loud, but when she looked in the window, he was asleep at his desk. He retired quietly in 2001, disconnected his landline, refused internet access, built his home like a fortress, blackout curtains, blessed artifacts, mirrors turned inward. He left a note in a safety deposit box only to be opened upon his death. It was found by his estate executor and handed off to church officials. That note, never released to the public, was briefly leaked by a former seminarian who claimed to have seen it during his internship. It read, "The rituals don't banish it. They only delay it. The demon wears your face in dreams. It learns from you. It becomes you. I saw what's on the other side. You'll see it too." The priest who read it, Father Samuel Gray, died 2 months later in a fire inside his rectory. The blaze was blamed on faulty wiring. The only room untouched by flame was his study. On the desk was a printed image from the Exorcist film, the face of the possessed girl Reagan. Written across it in charcoal, "You made me famous." Today, that message echoes in a strange new way. Across YouTube channels, TikToks, podcasts, books, retellings. Each time someone reopens the story, they scratch at the door a little more. Each reenactment, each mention, each obsession feeds it, strengthens it, as if the story wants to be told, needs to be told, because in telling it, you invite it back in. The more people believe, the more attention it gains. And belief is powerful. Maybe that's the real curse of The Exorcist. Not just that it terrified a generation, but that it planted a seed in millions of minds. A seed that says, this could happen to anyone. And that idea, once it takes root, can twist, grow, and open things that were never meant to be opened. Psychologists say mass hysteria explains it. Skeptics say it was all lies. Filmmakers say it was clever marketing. But some truths live in the spaces between explanations. And the strangest truth of all? It's spreading again. In early 2023, a teenage girl in Ohio began speaking in Aramaic during a live stream. Her family claimed she'd never even heard of the language. She spoke of a man with no name who come through stories. A priest was sent. He never returned home. In the Philippines, an actor who starred in a stage play of The Exorcist collapsed mid-performance. He was revived, barely coherent, and the only thing he could say was, "She's waiting behind the words." In Brazil, a digital archivist scanning old church records claimed his laptop crashed after opening a 1949 exorcism transcript. When he turned it back on, the only thing on his screen was a single phrase, "I remember you." It's as if the darkness doesn't want to be forgotten. It wants to evolve. And now it moves through screens, through audio, through attention. Because if a demon can take root in a child, why not in a network? Why not in a voice? Why not in you? You've followed the story this far. Felt your curiosity draw you in. Maybe you're thinking of researching more after this. Digging deeper. Reading the original diary. Watching the movie again. But be warned, this isn't just a story. It's an invitation. And sometimes, when you go looking into darkness, something looks back.